All right, y'all. Welcome. This week's Griscom stream. Hope that you are good wherever you are at. Um, Looking forward to this one. I'm watching the chat, so let's get moving. I'm just hanging out in the back. Give me a second. All right, let's get into it. I mean, I don't have too much on the agenda today. Just wanted to stop by and chat with everybody for a little bit. If you are listening to this in Austin, make sure that you show up and vote for Bob Leibel and Andrew Hairston. There's still another hour and a half that you can get to the polls. Those are both two really, really important races and a great kind of test and extension of working class power in the area. So I do hope that you show up for folks. Well, yeah, I'm hanging out. I'm happy to take questions on whatever's on people's minds. Happy to talk a little bit about Ben. Oh hell yeah, let's get a shout out to our friend Matt here, who was able to vote for both Bob Leibel and Andrew Harrison today. Hell yeah, I'm sad. I'm not in the cool district. I'm further south, so I wasn't able to to put my vote in for any kind of big time lefty or progressive folks. But I'm very excited to be watching. I'm really looking forward to be watching the results come in. We got a few things coming up tomorrow. Matt and I just finished recording a really, really enlightening and frustrating interview, just given the political context, with Becca Inhosa, who is a activist down in Brownsville, Texas, who was targeted by the government for allegedly defacing a pro Elon Musk mural downtown on city property. Really extreme stuff. Held for over 26 hours, not given the courtesy of even being allowed to wear shoes when she was walked out of her home. She was woken up in the early hours of the morning. I mean, just really extreme kind of state abuse stuff for the service of somebody, Elon Musk, who does not give a care to the people of Brownsville, to the working class people of Brownsville at all. In fact, he's called Brownsville a place that's great because you can blow up a rocket and if it falls down, there's nobody there, so nobody cares. Just extremely, extremely nasty stuff. Watch my social media after this. I'll put some links as to how you can help her and a little bit more information on that story. But that will be our main interview tomorrow, talking about this really extreme abuse of state power by people who are really cozying up to Musk and wanting to protect him from any kind of democratic criticism, any kind of political criticism, economic criticism of what he's been doing, and are willing to use like the full forces of the state, of the repressive apparatus of the government. So be sure that you catch that. And Matt and I have a few other things cooking up for y'all. And also for patrons, remember that we're doing our think tank. We'll be recording that tomorrow before the main show. So get your questions in at patreon.com/leftreckoning. We're trying to get all that in before Matt is out for the week on vacation. But yeah, that story in the story in Brownsville is absolutely frightening. And, I don't want to spoil too much of it because we're going to release that conversation tomorrow. But what's really frightening about it is essentially, there was some defacing. Basically, somebody wrote, gentrifying Brownsville over like a pro Elon Musk SpaceX mural that had been painted downtown. And for people who aren't familiar, SpaceX has moved down there. Musk is trying to colonize one of the towns, a beach area called Boca Chica, and renaming that Starbase. And of course, with no input really from the community, but he has donated heavily to things that are in the interest of the kind of political class, to people who are running that town. And when there was some kind of public outcry, criticism of Elon Musk, the city seems to have wanted to make an example out of this activist. Just really, really horrific stuff. And I can say though, after speaking with her for a while, an incredibly brave person, and we're in good hands knowing that people like Becca are down there doing organizing and fighting against this kind of abuse in South Texas. But it's really, really extreme stuff. And yeah, definitely look forward to that tomorrow. You can read about it in the Texas Observer too if you want to do some work beforehand. Dakota wants to know: are we getting any closer to bringing Matt out to our Texas goal? We got really, really close this month. I think we were at 975. Whenever it goes to the first of the month, we always get a huge drop off. But we're close, y'all. I mean, let's try to get Matt over here. I mean, we only need to hit 1,000 patrons. We almost crossed the threshold last week. But I can't tell you what the official numbers are now because there's usually a drop off between March 1st and March 2nd for folks. But let's try to get Matt down here. I mean, I'm ready. I mean, I've been prepping for the Matt trip. I got my vehicle, I got my smoker, taking care of the yard, making it all pretty. Let's get Matt Leck here, man. It's been a long enough time. Well, there we go. We got our friend MDR on the count there. Says we're at 974. So 26 to get Matt over here, y'all. Well, I'm watching the chat for questions, but while we're getting set up, and people are showing up, let's look at this. I don't know if y'all saw this. Obviously, our minds and our hearts have been really focused on what's going on in Ukraine and solidarity to people. I'm happy to see folks have been able to get out safely. I mean, it's really frightening stuff. But there's been another really important story, which is this very, very incredible piece of art that Dan Crenshaw has. And, people know who Dan Crenshaw is at this point. He's a congressman from the Houston area in one of these just ridiculously gerrymandered districts. He's somebody who publicly, yells at, young children for questioning his faith. This is somebody who very much considers himself to be the lead in a kind of like B level action movie. And he's also somebody who is funny to see. The real Trumpy guys, they don't like Dan Crenshaw because they think that he's turned his back on his people. And look, I don't want to like inspire too much loyalty to these right-wing movements among Republican politicians, but it is very funny that Dan Crenshaw, somebody who's tried to make his whole persona about being a kind of fearless and strong guy, really does bend and buckle whenever there is any kind of public pressure or shift, and he's pushed back against other members of the GOP. I mean, doesn't mean that his politics aren't completely odious, but this is just somebody who he'll support whatever is convenient for him at the time. But anyways, let's look at this because this is a really fascinating little portrait from the mind of Dan Crenshaw that he has behind him. So if you look behind him, it looks like kind of cheesy art that you'd see in a kind of conservative household, very much inspired by the Texas Revolution. You look a little closer here and you wonder, could that be Donald Trump? Maybe. I'd love to see Donald Trump on a horse. But as you look closer, oh my Lord, yes. This is a pure fantasy portrait right here, which I think is very, very fitting for somebody like Dan Crenshaw, who is very much a man who is inside his own head. There's Dan Crenshaw holding the "Come and Take It," the famous cry at the Alamo. Standing next to a young Eric Trump, Don Jr., and the rest of the kind of Trump entourage there. This is a guy who is in Congress right now. And I find this art to be absolutely fascinating if you haven't seen it. Mike says this is like the art in the Sopranos, which I think is pretty on point as well. Yeah, you know what? Is Dan, I mean, could Dan be Davy Crockett? I mean, whew, I should have got some pictures of myself when I was younger because I had a nice little fringe jacket like that as a kid and a coonskin cap, of course. Though apparently Davy didn't really wear that coonskin cap very often. Let me pull this up one more time for y'all. I think that's 100% right. I can't believe I didn't catch that the first go around. That Dan Crenshaw is very much dressed up as Davy Crockett. I think that'd be fair to say, right? Or Bowie. I say that's Davy Crockett. Davy Crockett, somebody who is a part of the lore here, who probably spent only about 3 weeks in Texas, actually, if you think about it, because he died at the Alamo. Um, but yeah, Dan Crenshaw dressing up as David Crockett in that. Is Mike Pence kneeling? Let me see. Something else, man. It's just one of those things that it's frustrating. As goofy as this shit is, that no, I don't think that's Mike Pence, is it? That looks like that might be. I can't really tell from here. Um, it's frustrating though, like as goofy as these guys are, that we're not just kicking their ass. um, but let's see. Anyway, let's get to some of these questions here. First one right here is from Lumen Music. Um, if Politicon and Triller join forces, do you think anyone on the left has a better chance of fighting Rogan than Cenk? Would you fight Ben Shapiro? Thanks. Well, I have to be careful here. I wouldn't be too worried about somebody like Ben Shapiro personally. I mean, Cenk's a pretty big dude. I feel like I wouldn't mess with Rogan, frankly. I think Rogan's. I'd sit that one out. um, Yeah, I mean, I could be wrong about this, but Crenshaw doesn't even have Trump's endorsement, right? He's been primaried from the MAGA right over the fact that he doesn't support Stop the Steal. What a cuck! I mean, that's the thing that's so funny about Crenshaw is Crenshaw thought he was going to be able to climb up, um, climb up in the Republican Party, and they still sort of put him out there as like the young face of this movement. But no doubt about it that his I mean, he's really like the hardcore Trumpers like really hate Dan Crenshaw. I know Alex Jones has some really funny comments on Crenshaw as well, right? I mean, Crenshaw like really I think got himself into some trouble, but Crenshaw looks like he's going to win his primary in a landslide. And the really frightening thing though is that as like these districts get more and more gerrymandered in Texas, I mean, and even statewide, as there's like less and less fear of Democratic state level candidate beating them, and the party's just getting crazier. Abbott, who has just been a complete psychopath, is now pursuing this barbaric policy of trying to separate trans children from their parents. If their parents accept them for who they are, and don't abuse them, as Abbott is trying to sort of force and threaten parents to do. They're threatening to take children away from their parents. I mean, that's as extreme as it gets. And even then, Abbott is getting challenged on the right. I mean, it's a weird ass time right now, for sure. um, Crenshaw must be an A&M. I mean, he is dumb enough with ridiculous art like that in his home. I wish he, as much as I'd love to sort of dunk on Crenshaw for that, you got to remember, Crenshaw is like the biggest silver spoon boy ever. I mean, this guy's Ivy League, to the T. This is somebody who has never really mingled with normal people. Hell, that is not somebody who's going to go to a state college. Are you kidding me? That's a private school boy. You should remember that when he puts on his kind of folksy persona. This is not somebody who's really spent very much time with normal people. And he has to be in this kind of insane gerrymandered district to survive. Not just because he couldn't win. The thing about Crenshaw is that it's not just that he had to be gerrymandered into a district that is Republican leaning. It really had to be one that was extremely affluent, because Crenshaw has turned his back time and time again on rural and working class people in the state of Texas. I mean, listen to the way that he talks about something that's extremely popular in the state of Texas, like expanding access to healthcare in rural areas, right, through expanding Medicaid. I mean, Crenshaw rails against this. He's truly a nasty guy. All right, well, let's see. We got a few things coming up. I mean, I have some Ukraine things I would like to get to, but if anyone wants to talk about other stuff, I mean, I don't know if y'all saw the Ben Burgess, Joe Rogan appearance. I've talked to to Ben, I was hanging out with Ben after the show. It seems like it went pretty well. I think that is a really great opportunity to try to reach an audience, and I think that that's something that we should be much more comfortable with doing. I mean, Joe Rogan certainly has a lot of takes and opinions that I find to be hard to square, and he certainly has a lot of extremely right wing guests. But there's no doubt about it that Rogan does sort of represent a kind of curious but apolitical group of listeners. And I think it's a shame to sort of sit out when we can sort of bring our ideas and movements and criticisms to those platforms. For people who aren't familiar, Michael was adamant, particularly privately, adamant about getting on Joe Rogan. And in fact, he was very frustrated, that he hadn't been. And I think there's no doubt about it that, Joe Rogan made a huge mistake by not having Michael on. It was very sweet to see that Rogan, without any kind of prompting from Ben, not only remembered Michael, but noted that he thought his impressions were very funny, which I think Michael would have got a kick out of, and would have been very happy to hear that. Frankly, um, yeah, I mean, I thought that Ben did a solid job on there, sort of bringing a different kind of idea and conception of politics, to a base and to a group that isn't really exposed to that as much. I mean, these are people who get worked up about cancel culture constantly. They're worked up about the masks and COVID in general, and we can roll our eyes at that, but that is a lot of people, and it's the way a lot of people are thinking, and like the point here, and what we need to be able to do is, if we want to build out this movement, is realize, you know, how can we make our views more accessible to folks um, than they currently are? Because the fact is, and I think most people who like live in regular communities and engage with people in the regular community, not people who just sort of consume a lot of politics media, you'll realize that people sometimes they have an idea that's sort of half baked, and it can even seem a little bit frustrating or offensive, even. But if you're able to dig through, or even produce a different alternative kind of view, um, you can make a lot of ground with folks. I mean, my whole life working with people, particularly in the South, was realization that even though people might not be quote unquote like left in the sense that they vote for Democrats, never that hard to talk to people about why the system works against them, why the boss sucks. You know, Concepts like exploitation, and why it'd be worthwhile for maybe us to join together and start putting our demands to our employers. Those things are very easy conversations to have, and we should be able and equipped on like a general interpersonal level to be able to do that. And I think the media is the same kind of way. That doesn't mean it's the Bernie rule, right? It's like when Bernie went on Rogan, for example. Rogan went on Bernie's side. Rogan said, "I think what Bernie is saying and is what he's representing is good, and I like that, and I support this guy." It wasn't some kind of transactional thing where Bernie Sanders, says, "I talked to Joe Rogan and I've changed my position on like the dignity of trans athletes," or something like that. That would be something I think to be upset about. But that wasn't the reality. What ended up happening with Bernie was he got to bring his message to a group of people who might not be exposed to it, or might be predisposed, to maybe dismiss it. But it was presented to them in a kind of friendly and in the house way. And I think that was effective, and that's what politics will look like as we start to build out and get more effective. So I thought that Ben's appearance was really great at like making these fundamental points, about concepts like socialism. What is it that we want? What kind of programs we would like to see expanded, why the post office is good, etc. So I was very happy to see Ben do that. Um, I mean, it seemed like Joe Rogan seemed like a very nice guy. Um, it's from all that I understood. Um, you know, I won't spill any secrets or anything like that, but it seems like it was a good time. Um, Ben normalized socialism by planting seeds. The Rogan's audience doesn't always have to be a Fox News battle every time. Yeah, and I think that that's like one of the kind of criticisms that you get from folks is like, well, Ben should have gone there with like a laundry list of things to like come at him for. And I just can't imagine how people mean that in a serious fashion. So I'm going to tell you right now, as a media professional, not that, frankly, I will say we're very transparent. We don't do any editing of our um, interviews unless like maybe there's a technical issue or something like that. But as you see, that's why we like to do the live shows. But you know, if you just went in there and you start just like laying into Rogan on a lot of stuff, I can promise you that it wouldn't go to air. And not even because they're trying to hide something, because it would be really tedious and boring. And and for better or for worse, like Joe Rogan has an entertaining show, because of like the demeanor and the way that people are able to engage in conversations. It's not debate hour. That doesn't mean that you can't be critical of that program or the guests or the things that are said on there. But it does mean that, if you have any expectation or any desire to sort of reach a new audience through using those platforms, you're not going to be able to do it by going into the Joe Rogan show and just like lambasting Joe Rogan on all the things that he said or all the guests that he's had. We can always be better. But I think that kind of mentality is sort of wrong-headed, frankly. I'll go on Joe Rogan if he wants me. So I did not see this yet, John. I'll look into it. David, what do you know about the executive order Biden signed about government jobs over 30 million requiring PLAs? To your knowledge, how solid is the order? I'm not familiar with that, so I gotta see it. I think most people have been pretty stoked on Ben. I mean, I think that some people like are genuinely wrestling with some serious questions that I think is valid. But I do think that there's a kind of fantastical level to some of the criticism of just sort of outlining that like what we were going to do there is like call like Ben Burgess was going to go and like just sit there and call out Joe Rogan on a bunch of things. I don't see that to be the best strategy or something that would even be effective because frankly, I don't think that would even get to air. Yeah, and when Bernie went on a Fox town hall, the audience went on to his side. We'll see. I mean, I think that was very helpful. I mean, Fox News is like there's a the thing that's funny about it too is like um like Fox News is one of those things. Like, I think if you are in the media, you have to be careful about how you do it, because they do try to get you on there to sort of put you in a box or to talk about something very, very specific that you might agree with somebody on. That then sort of makes it seem like tacitly you agree with everything else on the program. It's like, oh well, this guy, is sort of gets it and he's on our side, right? Like that can be really, really dangerous, or at least unhelpful. But I do think that like that's why Bernie was so great is because he was able to reach a bunch of different folks and like just going back to like the very general like audience of Joe Rogan from the people who I know in my life. I really like that program. I mean, it's people who like, are apolitical for the most part, but they're very curious and they like to see things presented in a certain way. And, I think that we don't have to modify the content of what we're saying, but I do think sometimes the packaging can matter. I don't think that at the same time, hyper focusing on trying to like, appeal to like the Joe Rogan listener as like the first and foremost question of like our messaging or politics is necessarily the top of my priorities. But I think that it's something you should always be sort of questioning. It's like, are we able to reach people if somebody's coming and interacting with these arguments for the first time? Are they being presented in a way that can help bring them to the conclusions that we make? Because you can't assume that everybody has, I'm not even talking about life background. I'm talking about just like understanding certain kind of concepts. When people hear me say exploitation, they might just think that I mean like being treated badly, right? But there's a very particular like Marxist definition of what exploitation is, right? and that is the relationship between the value that you produce when you're at the job versus what you receive versus what your boss perceives, right? And under capitalism, workers are exploited in that system. So yeah, it is about the way that people are being treated, but there's a very technical aspect to it. You know, where people will say something like, "Well, what about when a worker exploits a boss?" I remember people have commented on videos saying that, and I realized it's like, well, okay, well, this person doesn't recognize or get what we're talking about, and you have to find a balance between being really tedious and sort of like redefining everything when you talk about something, but it also is, oh shit, well, that's something that I need to work on, to make these things a little bit more clear when we're talking about things with those kind of terminology, right? Like that's the point, is that like you have to understand that like people come into conversations with just many different kind of understandings. And if you want to be doing anything public facing or media facing, you have to find ways to reach people where they are at. Um, and I think that's a very important project. Um, I watched some racist, yeah, I mean, some stuff. Um, yeah, these videos have been really horrific. I mean, for people who haven't seen them, I mean, basically, college students who are in Ukraine who are black, were refused entry by like citizen, kind of vigilantes. From my understanding, it wasn't like a government program. Um, it's absolutely, a horrific episode, in a moment of, real human crisis, and it's sad to see, that is, just continues to be such a reality, just a very, very strong racist prejudice against black people. And um, I think it's worthwhile, to let people know about this. um, I think it's important also not to over determine it, in the sense of thinking that like this is somehow representative of the entire nation of Ukraine. But certainly this is a really horrific incident. I mean, could you imagine being in a foreign country, um, and being denied access to a train to escape as bombs are flying? I mean, drop just like the prejudice there. I mean, just like the humanity of like fear that people are feeling, and they're trying to flee a place that they might not be as familiar with, and then those same people are not letting you leave. I mean, that's scary as shit. And this is the real tragedy of wars, like all of these other things that sort of trickle out of it, all these social conflicts that are going on. I mean, I think that, people who think that it's worth, I highly disagree with people who think that it's worth suppressing that kind of information. You should be able to talk through, what that means for your larger prescriptions, if you're making them. I did ask Ben if he was going to smoke weed with him, with Joe Rogan, and Ben said probably would not be a good idea if it makes the mind a little fuzzy. Um, I think that if you go and you read some of the comments and things that people have been saying about, in response to Ben, going on there, um, I think that you start to win people's minds over, and it's not always a one for one that it's like, oh, I saw Ben Burgess on the Joe Rogan experience, and now I'm a lefty. But oh wait, actually, like these kind of economic arguments that I'm getting from people like Ben Shapiro, or this bizarro world shit that is presented by James Lindsay, it's worthwhile to debunk that, and it's worthwhile to find the people who are being reached, by the right wing. I don't think that people recognize just how um, uh, prevalent extreme kind of right wing propaganda is out there for people who are looking to do like their own research on things, right? Which is like a lot of that audience, right? Um, this is where James Lindsay like really thrives. Is he gets people who are thinking like, oh, well, there's this ideology and this philosophy called Marxism that I'm hearing more and more about. I want to understand it, and then James Lindsay explains it in a completely batshit way, but using kind of rhetorical tactics that make it seem like he really understands it, citing titles of books and dates and things like that. Even though it was all over the place, and anyone who's really familiar with those texts, can debunk him on that. But you remember that the audience that James Lindsay is trying to reach is not people who are familiar with these ideas; it's people who aren't, right? And that's where he thrives and is able to build up a very rabid and worrying right wing movement. So I think that is absolutely important, right now, especially as more and more people are learning about things like socialism and Marxism, to actually be out there on mainstream publications or venues, even if you don't love everything that's going on there, because there is a whole host of people who will happily fill in for you, to mislead people, and I think you should be worried about that. Yeah, we do live in a fucked up society, um, where Dave Rubin gets a spot on the largest podcast in the land, and Michael Brooks doesn't get the same privileges. All right. I mean, like, the funniest thing I was saying, I've never really listened to Joe Rogan show. Like, it's never been something that I was particularly into. Um, and the only podcast I really listen to, other than our friends' shows, is like Your Kickstarter Sucks, right? Um, and but I will say, like, the funniest thing about the Joe Rogan show is, like, despite this is just a random thought, but like, despite everything that's happened since, when I realized that COVID was real was when I listened to the first COVID episode on the Joe Rogan show, which again I never watched. I don't know or listened to. I don't know why I picked it up, but I was moving into a new place, and um, so I was like packing up boxes, and I was just needing things to listen to when I was doing it, and I was like, oh, I'll listen to Joe Rogan on this new disease that everyone's talking about. And then listening to that as it was going on, I started being like, oh shit, this might be like legit and a very real thing that's going to be in our lives for a while. I don't know. Funny enough. So the point is, like, you don't know who, like, who all these people out there who listen to this stuff is. Um, all right. I'm going to come back up and go down. Well, I will put this up. I mean, I appreciate it from our friend in Australia. Um, I have not had a kid. Is that a rumor that's been going around? I did notice some people were tweeting about that. No, I don't have a kid, nor do have any plans to in the near future. Uh, but I'll put that to bed, I guess. Um, the James Lindsay stuff, I can't tell y'all how seriously I take that stuff at this point. Um, go and look at our videos that we've done at James Lindsay recently, and like read the comments. I mean, there's some really unhinged stuff in there, and and it's frustrating because you realize how like plugged into that weird James Lindsay ideology a lot of those people are. Like, frankly, like, people get worked up about Joe Rogan. I think there's a lot of stuff that he says that is just boneheaded, frankly. But I don't find it actually to be quite like coherent. I think Lindsay really does dabble in some serious far right fascist stuff, particularly the willingness to sort of play in the irrational. I mean, that is such a big part. If you read, like Umberto Eco's piece on what is fascism or fascism, like this willingness to sort of play in this kind of irrationality, almost like spiritual language about good versus evil, is like such a big part of early European fascism. And I think people should take that much more seriously, especially again because James Lindsay is sort of creating an ideological apparatus for these people, who really buy into his stuff, that has very very little to do with the actual reality of the arguments that the people who he's opposing are saying. This is somebody who says critical race theory, which again, we say this on the show time and time again, is a theory and a way of thinking that is actually like very much in opposition with Marxism. Right? These are not like things that are sort of developing in and out of each other. I mean, CRT, in like its most, um, you know, uh, true sense, in the sense of like what the academic arguments in it, is something that is at odds with Marxism as a political and legal philosophy. And to sort of paint these things as they're part of the same side, I mean, is extremely dangerous. Um, and even though it's not reflective of any of that kind of actual reality there, his ability to play that game should take people should take it really seriously, frankly. Well, let's just keep going. Yeah. Or Fascism by Echo is great. Is a great text. Yeah, people should definitely check that out. I'm just scrolling back up. Sorry. Um, yeah, I mean, I'll say about Ben. Ben has a lot of patience for doing the right wing debates. Circuit that I just do not have. Or it's good to have a friend who can do that. Um, yeah, I need to quell whatever rumors about me having a secret child. Where did that start from? Um, what is ESG? I don't know what that is. I heard James Lindsay on a clip of Michaela Peterson's, which is so amazing that she's turned into a media star herself. He was talking about some nonsense about ESG scores. Was my first exposure to him. I mean, I've told people this before that one thing that always pisses me off about Lindsay is it is personal. Is that um, was it? Where did Michael do his talk? I can't remember off the top of my head, y'all. I'm sorry. The college. It wasn't Amherst. That's where he went. I can't remember. Y'all have probably seen this, like the very great and famous now Michael lecture video, um, where he's drinking his tea and answering a bunch of questions and just like really feeling his game. I mean, he was on it. Those folks, and they're very 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 nice folks. They had sort of wanted to organize a conversation on cancel culture, and woke stuff. Um, and had first asked Michael to sort of be like a critical host to James Lindsay at their school when for James Lindsay to sort of talk about. Remember, he did his big his hoax papers where he got published in a bunch of like gender studies journals, like very obscure gender studies journals, by lying in the work, which is not something that the academic review process is supposed to be catching in the first place. They're supposed to catch bad data and bad conclusions, but not people just straight up fabricating stuff. But leave that. Anyway, they had Michael said he didn't really want to do it. He called me and we talked about if he should do it or not. I said, it's not good. And then he was trying to help me out. And was trying to see if I might be interested in taking the spot because it might be good for me to get more notoriety and do something like that. And we both decided that's cancel culture bullshit. And that was like that was the day before he passed away, and it just sort of fucking pisses me off sometimes to think about that guy having to waste his time thinking about James Lindsay there. um just a real piece of shit. All right, Lafayette, yes, thank you for the reminder. That's where it was. um Well, I missed the Griscom stream last week because I was hanging out with Ben Burgess. um, I probably made it seem a little like that's probably on me. I did say it was an emergency, but a good one. Um, all right. So can we do this? That's really fucking funny. Um, well, let me share this with y'all. I'm gonna have to run in a minute, but I'd be happy to maybe take a few more questions. I wanted to share this with y'all. Um, this is a video that was put out by. Let me get it right here because this is a new group. I was not familiar with them, but they are called Double Down News in the UK, and this is a longer conversation with Jeremy Corbyn on Ukraine, and I think that it's a very, very, um, I think it's a strong synthesis. Matt and I are gonna talk about Ukraine obviously a bit more tomorrow. This week has been very difficult to see what's been happening. Um, no, if you have a question, send it to me now because I must have skipped over it. I'm sorry for that. Um, but I'll answer it on the other side of this Corbyn video because I think that a lot of people have been having hot takes, and I think a lot of people have been getting confused about what the kind of principled anti-imperialist position to take. At a moment when there are these horrific attacks on folks in Ukraine, just really just meaningless suffering. coming from Putin, um, and his regime there. And it's only going to get worse, unfortunately. I mean, I think I saw something around this morning. There's 750,000 refugees from Ukraine already. Those numbers are only going to grow, and I think that we need to take this crisis very, very seriously, without dropping our principles in fighting for a better world. And I think that there's been this like kind of really stupid um, tribalism, where people putting their flags, little freaks putting their flags as Russians, and also the same thing with people um, basically watching this as if it's like a movie or Marvel show or something like that. Something to really pick a side on and cheer for your team to win, instead of what it is a human catastrophe that was caused by great power conflict, that has now put millions and millions of Ukrainian people in the crosshairs. You know, along with people who were advocating and fighting against this in Russia. I mean, there's a lot to get to. I think, anyways, I want to play this real quick because I think this Corbyn video really strikes a strong balance here of holding that humanity really closely, while not missing the kind of political situations that got us into this crisis in the first place. Um, so let me bring this up here.
In peace in the future, as should the peoples of every other country of the world. We have to apply political pressure on Russia and support the public pressure that's there in Russia to end this war and to withdraw those Russian forces. And we should go back to the original agreements relating to Ukraine that were made in Budapest and the later Minsk agreement, which was designed to bring about a long-term ceasefire. All wars end with a political solution. All wars end with dialogue. Why don't we cut out the fighting zone and go straight into the talking zone? It's very easy for a politician in any parliament in the West to get up and say, go to war, go to war, go to war. It's always easy to vote for somebody else's children to go to war and die. When a war takes place, there's always a desire by the opposing sides to make sure it's only their line and their story that gets out. And so it's truth that is the first casualty in the fog of war. Keir Starmer claims that the Stop the War Coalition is a Russian stooge. There is no evidence anywhere they've done anything other than stand up for peace around the world. In my own case, there's a record going back as long as your arm, both in the Soviet Union and in post-Soviet Russia, because human rights and solidarity are universal, irrespective of the convenience or inconvenience of the time. I get accused of being pro-Russian and pro-Putin. I'm pro-human rights, actually. That's my position. Putin was promoted into office with the support of Tony Blair and some other Western leaders, and he was welcomed in the West, state visit to Britain. At that very time, the Chechen war was going on. The appalling loss of life of Chechen people and of Russian people, the abuse of the human rights of the Chechen people, the racism towards Chechens in Moscow and other cities was palpable. I was part of a delegation to Moscow with the Parliamentary Human Rights Group, an all-party delegation. We met many Russian officials complaining about the abuse of human rights. And indeed, with Tony Benn, I was part of a public demonstration, a march through London in support of the rights of Chechen people. And at the time of the awful event in Salisbury, I said that it was the Tory party in Britain that had received a great deal of money from Russian oligarchs, and that we should be looking at the question of Russian money in Britain.
We're all familiar with the way huge fortunes, often acquired in the most dubious circumstances in Russia, sometimes connected with criminal elements, have ended up sheltering in London and trying to buy political influence in British party politics. And there has been over £800,000 worth of donations to the Conservative Party from Russian oligarchs and their associates.
I was ridiculed at the time, and now we're getting on to
people can find the full video there at Double Down News. I retweet it as well. You can find it probably fastest by going to my thread. I mean, it's so terrible what they did to Corbyn, who I think probably out of any of the major Western leftists, at least in the English speaking part of the world, I think actually holds a pretty strong line here, that I think is the proper kind of anti-war, anti-imperialist, pro-human position. It's unbelievable what they did to him. It's also unbelievable what's going on with that within the Labor Party itself. Where they're now targeting members for even mentioning the history that has led to this conflict. I mean, we are in a very worrying time when there is a kind of demand from major political parties to be ahistorical about this conflict, to forget everything. It's always funny. It's you can't criticize because the election's coming up, and if you criticize, we'll be in trouble. You can't criticize because there's a war going on, and if you criticize, you'll be aiding the enemy. You just have to start to make the realization sooner or later that they just don't want you to criticize, and we are all in a much more dangerous place if those forces that are anti-democracy, are able to win out there. But Matt and I will talk more in depth about this tomorrow. And thank God for Corbyn, and I'm very happy that he's been able to to continue to fight back. Thanks Kowalski for the chat. It gives us this very weird audio text version of this. KJ35 wants me to explain how Leninism should fit into a modern socialist understanding of socialism. Leninism to me has always been a bridge too far. I take issue with the vanguard idea. Thanks. I mean, Lenin, what people mean by Leninism and Lenin's work are typically like pretty far apart. I mean, like, think about the way that most high school students learn about even like Maoism, for example. Like Maoism is communism, but is agrarian. Leninism is communism or Marxism, but in a country that is underdeveloped, right? These kind of like more simplistic understandings, or Leninism is solely, for example, about the conception of vanguard, the vanguard party. I think to understand Lenin, you need to go in and interact with Lenin's works. Matt and I have been trying to do more of that. I highly suggest you watch our video of Lenin kind of explaining some of the basic tenets of Marxism that he finds to be, crucial for socialists to understand. We also have a Patreon episode that maybe we'll release publicly soon about Lenin's writings and letters to the American working class. But Lenin's work and understanding his philosophy, you have to understand it as very dynamic and unfolding in the particular conditions of pre-revolutionary and revolutionary Russia, right? And if you read Lenin, in the same way that if you read Marx, you got to remember that Marxism is a dynamic, not a dogmatic theory. What I mean by dynamic is that it's moving, and instead of having hard precepts, and a sort of like checklist of, okay, you have to do this, and that. It's a kind of mode of analysis that can allow us to make informed decisions to bring to bring forward a certain kind of outcome. I just say that because I'd love to take your question more in depth in the future and sort of break down those dynamics. But I do think that the kind of like flashcard version of like Lenin or Leninism as being like, well, Lenin wants there to be a vanguard party. And what the vanguard party is when a small group of people tell other people what to do, and I think that that's a lot of people on the outside. That's sort of how they understand his philosophy. And I think that that's a big mistake. Rather, Lenin's recognizing that there are openings in politics and in history. And if you have an active cadre, if you have active groups within a class, within a movement, a lot can get done, right? This is one of like the big tensions that, like, to bring it to a modern context, this is one of the big tensions that we're seeing with the American socialist left, right? Is there's a category of people who want to demand the world today, even though we haven't built up the conditions or the capacity to act on that, right? Those are the people who are very, very, hardcore. Don't vote for any kind of candidates, for example, because they're going to Bernie Sanders is a social democrat, right? So that is not going to achieve socialism. It's like, well, no one's arguing that it is, but certainly that moment opened up a lot of political space for us, and it was incredibly moving in building a kind of class consciousness in this country, not without its own pitfalls and contradictions that we're trying to work our way out of, right? So like there's that group of people who are like super hardcore, that they're demanding like, the future society today, and they want to completely ignore material conditions, right? And then there's another poll in, trust me, I'm getting to the question about Lenin in just a second. There's another poll that's like very much like they want to sit back and they say, well, the consciousness of workers in this country is only at this level, right? So we should, only follow them as far as people are sort of willing to go spontaneously. And that tenet, I think a lot of people don't like it because it's not particularly attractive. It's not really exciting to just sort of sit and watch, basically. But there are like some reasons why that can be, it can maybe seem a little bit appealing, right? If we can get some changes today, if we're seeing people demanding, very specific things, like, for example, like movement on healthcare, right? Is it so bad to, sort of follow people where they're going, and really advocate with them for these things? If it gives us, some minor reforms in our lifetimes, it might not be socialism, and most people might not consider, the movements that they're building right now to be about building socialism. But will that not be a better world, right? And that effectively is just, kind of like progressivism, or like, maybe some kind of conscious, like, social democracy, right? And those are two very different poles. And I think maybe a way to think about, the space that we can sort of get into when we're thinking about an active membership of the working classes, understanding that socialist people who consider themselves to be socialist, people who are engaged in politics in a really active way, right, are like the activist branch of the working class, and they should not feel that they need to sprint 5 steps ahead. And this is Lenin too. Like Lenin, like literally says you can't be sprinting 10 steps ahead of the working class, but you can be agitating and demanding the logical next conclusion from the positions that you're starting to see bubble up in the masses, right? That's taking a radical demand for affordable healthcare, right? That is quite, prominent within people, and saying decommodified healthcare, Medicare for all, right? Universal healthcare, or we want fair wages, or we want, affordable rents, to saying decommodified housing, to take the property relationship out, the private property relationship out of, the conception and the question of housing, right? That's a way to be active within these movements. So you're still in them and reacting to them and moving with them, but without just sort of sitting in the back, and not recognizing that there is an active role that people who are spending a lot of time and are active and are thinking of themselves as socialists and trying to build class consciousness shouldn't be so timid about saying, no, we should take this next step, and advocating and agitating for that, right? And is that something that is is such a worrying kind of political concept? I don't know, and I think that's people get worked up about a concept like vanguardism, and I don't think that, for example, that like the proper path is to sort of create a new 21st century Leninism, that will just sort of paint itself in the same clothes and act in the same ways, because the conditions are radically different. I actually think being a good Leninist is analyzing the conditions that you currently are in, and advocating and building a movement that can respond to them, because that's how Lenin was able, like the concepts that you might think of as Leninist, where Lenin taking a material analysis to a very particular political and historical situation in Russia in 1905 and 1917, right? And I remember that too. There was the first revolution, that sort of brought in some basic form of democracy to the country, that preceded the 1917 one, right? So I think thinking about that in that way might be helpful, but I hope that sort of clears something up for you. I guess my audio was bad during the Corbyn clip. I apologize for that. Somebody asked if we want to do stuff with Navarro. I mean, I'd be happy to. We've had Grace Blakely on. People should definitely check out that. that interview. Was very happy to speak with her. She's also been really phenomenal on this as well. Kowalski wants to know how long of a voicemail you can leave. I mean, I trust your judgment, Kowalski. I would say, if we keep them within reason, it's helpful. Just because if we end up with like a bunch of 15-minute long ones, it might be difficult for us. But I trust your judgment there. And I think I'm gonna roll down to the bottom of this, and I have to run. But there's a huge gap of understanding of Marx and Lenin's ideas. Even those in favor of socialism don't get the history of these movements. We have a lot to learn seriously. All of us do, and I think that's one of the things that we're sort of seeing with this this moment right now. So I was saying to Matt earlier today that we had everybody like in a room or watching the same channel within the Bernie movement, and I think one of the real shames is that we didn't do proper political education there. Because I think a lot of people don't understand why we advocate for certain things. Dr. Smur says it's an active philosophy in that it not only presents an interpretation of the world, but a program for practical human action to change it. Yeah. Okay, I'm trying to get to the bottom, and then okay. Our questioner says thanks. Appreciate that. Of course, I'm always happy to get y'all's questions. And you can reach out to me, about things too. I'm always happy. For example, if you have any questions about things to read or things like that, I don't have all the answers, but if I know something, I'm always happy to send things to folks. Okay, well, I'll say on this, I sort of took a stab at it a second ago. I don't know if this is older, um, but I mean, vanguardism. The idea of vanguardism is that like basically have a party that is representative of like a conscious section of the working class that sort of pushes the way forward, and is not something that is necessarily like completely. You're not waiting for the conditions to be such that like you have an entire network within the entirety of the working class, but rather a very active um, section of it that ends up being the vanguard party, right? The leading the front line of this kind of political movement as the consciousness is developing for the rest of the working class, right? And this is the argument that Lenin makes about the Bolsheviks, particularly why the Bolsheviks, in his time, end up taking power against all of the other movements that were going on at the time, right? And there's a bit of that that's like very, very historically contingent in the sense that like this is happening in crisis of 1917 when there was worries that they were going to sort of roll back the revolutionary potential of the Russian Revolution. And to sort of set up, like a more typical Western European parliamentary system, et cetera, et cetera. And Lenin says, like, we're at the gates of power. Like, let's go all the way, right? And I don't think that necessarily that's the model that we should be pursuing today. I think that to really understand that, you should understand where that happened, and why it happened, and also recognize, that once you sort of go off into that direction, you have to do a lot of work to cultivate, internal democracy and consciousness within the working class movement as a whole as you continue to develop it. And, frankly, you see what happens after Lenin dies, that process very much stops, and the state and the system becomes ossified and hardened under Stalin. So I don't think the answer is necessarily to do, a 21st century Leninism in the same kind of model or clothes, but maybe to learn the lessons as to how Lenin and the working class movement and communist movement in, for example, Russia at that time, were able to recognize a radical opportunity, and utilize that, for the benefit of working class movement, right? Like those are the kind of lessons there. But I hope that was helpful. But I think if you go back a couple minutes, I sort of took a dive into that. All right. And yeah, I mean, and MDR makes a point here too. Lenin was holding out for the revolution to happen in Germany. I mean, people do need to recognize that too, that, there was this kind of hope that, the chain of imperialism broke at its weakest link in Russia. And then soon after Germany would join them. And that doesn't end up happening. And, our friend Danny Bessner and Matt Chrisman on the podcast Hinge Points do have a pretty fun and interesting conversations about what could have been, but we all know how it ended up working out, and they created a system that was supposed to withstand and withhold, and basically protect the gains that they had won while the revolutionary process was like completing itself across Europe. And that didn't end up happening. And a lot of the vestiges of the Soviet system really did come out of that analysis. And obviously it's easy to sit here and think that, like, knowing what we know, that maybe that was a far-fetched idea. I mean, it really did feel like, I feel like for a lot of people at that time, that revolution was around the corner, particularly in Germany at that moment, and it did not. Okay. All right, y'all. I appreciate everybody. Appreciate everybody hanging out. This went a little bit longer than I planned, but I'll see y'all tomorrow. This conversation that we have with Becca, who's an activist down in Brownsville, who is targeted by the police there and by the mayor, for being a known person who is against Elon Musk's colonization of the area. It's pretty striking stuff, and I highly suggest checking out that interview tomorrow and finding ways to help her out in the future. And I'll see you all tomorrow. If you're a patron, please be sure to get some questions in. There's a post on patreon.com/leftreckoning. Matt and I are doing Think Tank this week. Also, we're taking voicemails too, so always happy to hear from you. All right, take care.